A sermon for 15th Sunday of the year 2025. Today I want to talk about the Ashton riots. You probably wonder what I mean. In 1999 I was sent to Ashton to be the parish priest of St Anne's Church, St Mary's Church and chaplain at Tameside Hospital, a tall order. In St Anne's Presbytery, on the wall there were these photos of that presbytery and that church with all the windows smashed. So I said to the people, what's all this about? And they said, it's the Ashton riots, have you never heard about them? I said, no. I'd been in Oldham for 5 years and it's only 4 miles away, but never heard about them. So this is the story. On Sunday afternoon, the 10th of May, 1868, benediction was taking place in St Anne's Church when they noticed the noise of a mob outside. So all the windows in the church were smashed. The mob entered into the church, dragged the benches outside and started a bonfire. And they smashed all the plaster statues outside on Burlington Street. So this was the background. In 1820, 40 years before, there were few Catholics in Ashton. Most people were C of E, Methodist, Congregationalist. But by 1847, 10% of Ashton population was Catholic. The influx after the Irish potato famine of 1954. In the American Civil War, 1861 to 65, there was a blockade of the southern ports by the Union Army, the Northern Army. So the cotton from the southern states of America could not be exported. So the cotton mills in Ashton were idle. There was a build-up of tension and resentment and intolerance. William Murphy, an Irishman, was a hardline Northern Irish Protestant, went round the big industrial towns of England, stirring up hatred and inciting riots against the newly arrived Irish Catholic labourers. He made inflammatory anti-Irish and anti-Catholic speeches. He'd already been to Stalybridge, causing riots and fighting in that town. And he arrived in Ashton this Sunday afternoon I was talking about, with a mob calculated at 2,000. Men were drunk on cheap beer and gin. Anyway, back to St Anne's Church, built in 1852, designed by Pugin, renowned English architects, and a very beautiful church with very expensive stained glass windows. Every window in the church and presbytery was smashed. Eventually, the local constabulary arrived, which amounted to 18 constables, which quelled the riot a little bit, but not enough for the mob to run across town and start the siege of St Mary's Church, which is only 500 yards away, built because of the huge number of Catholics in Ashton, because they could not fit into one church. Father Beasley, the parish priest, was alerted, and 20 parishioners barricaded themselves in the church. They piled the pews against the door of the church and withstood the surge of the mob. Again, all the windows were broken, but they could not enter the church. The priest and the parishioners went up into the bell tower, and there was an Irish parishioner who was a Fenian, who had a gun, and from time to time he leased off a shot or two, which kept the mob at bay. The mayor, Henry Downson Esquire, was summoned from the town hall, and he called the chairman of the watch committee. And he sent up to Ladysmith Barracks, just up the road towards Mossley, for the army. And that was home of the 63rd and 95th Foot Regiment of the King's Regiment. So they marched out with bayonets glistening in the sun and lined up outside the church. The Mayor read out the Riot Act. Now bear in mind, this was not long after the Peterloo massacre in 1918 in Manchester, when the cavalry charged a crowd who were demanding reform of parliamentary representation. 12 were killed and 400 injured. So the Mayor read out the Riot Act, which meant if the crowd didn't disperse, they could be arrested, bayoneted, or even shot on sight. So they very quickly dispersed. Most were drunk anyway, and were fired up by Murphy's rabble-rousing, and by now had had enough fun for the day. 12 of the rabble-rousers were arrested and sentenced to 6 months hard labour in Strangeways prison. The army that day, the regiment, was commanded by Major Barry Dixon, who came from a wealthy landowning family in England, and he asked his parents to pay for the first of the new stained glass windows reinstalled in St Anne's Church on the top right hand side. His name's in the glass. St Mary's Church was so badly damaged by the mob as to be pulled down, and a nearby empty Methodist church was purchased, and that became the St Mary's Church that I inherited in 1999.